We're in 2 Samuel chapter 17, but just a couple of statements. Remember in 2 Samuel 15, Absalom, David's son, steals the hearts of the Jewish men away, and they are supporting him as king now. King David has left. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, Saul's family, the old king that David replaced, his father-in-law, King Saul's family, reacts to David's departure. We saw that last time. This man Shimei, who was cursing David, calling him a man of bloodshed, throwing rocks and dirt at him as they left, and David allowed him to do it. We also learned about Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, and whether he had actually betrayed David or not. There's a great big question mark there. I do not believe that he did. I think his servant Ziba was lying. And then we get to this idea of Ahithophel. Now, there's a couple of names that are going to be batted back and forth today. Ahithophel is one of them, and he was David's counselor. We don't know how long he's been David's counselor, but I would venture to say for decades, 10, 20, 30 years. David's been king now for 35 years in Israel, and Ahithophel was one of his counselors. But Ahithophel has turned coat and is now supporting Absalom, David's son. He's abandoned his loyalty to King David, and he has presented himself as a counselor for Absalom, the conspirator. And the other name that we're going to see is this name Hushai, Hushai, Hushai. And Hushai is David's friend. Ahithophel used to be David's friend. He's not anymore. Hushai is David's friend. And Hushai is the one that David said, I need a spy in the palace. I need you to go back in. It would be very valuable to me if you went back to Jerusalem and planted yourself in my son Absalom's cabinet so that when things occur, you can get information to me. And so Ahithophel and Hushai are the names that we're going to see in 2 Samuel chapter 17. Now, the scene is back in Jerusalem. Remember, David is leaving to the east through the Kidron Valley, up the Mount of Olives, and on to the east. He's continuing to make his way toward the Jordan Valley, and the scene right now goes back to the city of Jerusalem, where Absalom, David's son, is acting as the king of Israel. Verse 1, 2 Samuel 17 says, furthermore, the continuation of the story from verse 16, it says, furthermore, Ahithophel said to Absalom. So this is the great counselor, and he's giving counsel to David's son. Ahithophel said to Absalom, please let me choose 12,000 men that I may arise and pursue David tonight. This is good advice. This is wise advice, well thought out advice, based on Ahithophel's knowledge of his King David for all those years he served him, and based on Ahithophel's knowledge of David's condition when he left Israel, when he left Jerusalem. Remember from last week, just as we push forward, remember from last week what the Jewish people thought of Ahithophel's advice. Ahithophel has just given Absalom advice. We should attack now. You should let me choose 12,000 trained men. You should let me lead them into battle, and we will defeat David. He'll say more about that in a minute. And this is the way Israel accepted Ahithophel's advice when he spoke. A very, very wise, sagely man. 2 Samuel 16, verse 23 from last week, it says, the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, to not only King David, but now to Absalom, was as if one inquired of the word of God. It was accurate. It was sound. It was Bible-based, godly advice. So when Ahithophel says, let me choose 12,000 men that I may arise and pursue David tonight, this is good advice. He could have defeated David if he'd have been listened to. It says, so was all the advice of Ahithophel regarded by both David and Absalom. So both David and Absalom, his son, regarded Ahithophel's advice as perfect, as if God himself spoke through this man. And he just gave another good bit of information. Remember what King David himself thought of Ahithophel's advice. It says in 2 Samuel chapter 15, we go back 2 chapters now, it says, now someone told David, as David is fleeing his son Absalom, someone told David, and this is what they said, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. He has turned coat. Your famous, all Israel knows this man, your famous counselor has abandoned loyalty to you and is now serving your son. Ahithophel is among the conspirators. And David immediately prayed a prayer. Because he knows if Ahithophel's advice is given to Absalom, he will know how to defeat me. He'll know what to do. And David immediately utters a prayer when he finds out Ahithophel is on the other side now. He says, O Lord Yahweh, I pray, make the counsel of Ahithophel foolishness. Again, this man's advice had for decades at least been right and proper. He's a wise man. He's got great insight. He's got clear vision, and David knows it. So what David is praying is that when he gives good advice to Absalom, and he will because he's wise, Lord, I need you to flip it. I need you to somehow spin it so it's not taken. I need you to make his advice foolishness, because when he gives advice, it's not foolish, but I'm asking you to make it foolishness because I know he knows me. If David has an Achilles heel, if David has a weakness in leaving Jerusalem, it's this man Ahithophel who knows him intimately. So David asks this of God, and we see God immediately answered David's prayer, because who just so happened to be walking beside David at this time but his friend Hushai, right? Like there's a coincidence here. There is not. So Hushai is walking along with David. David says, I need a spy in the palace. Go back to Absalom. Make him believe that you are loyal to him now, and feed me information from him. So who do we see here? I just want to back up 1 second and say it again and ask you a question. David realizes that one of his greatest allies has now become his greatest enemy. It's not his son, it's Ahithophel. It's the counselor. That's who he's nervous about. You notice David doesn't say to, oh Lord, I pray, make Absalom's throne unsuccessful. He doesn't say anything about his son. It's Ahithophel he's nervous about. And he prays to God. Remember, David is a no-good adulterer and a convicted murderer. And you would think if God was angry with David that he wouldn't answer his prayer, but instead what you see in the narrative here is that God answers David's prayer immediately by sending Hushai to his side. And just then Hushai passed by and is having conversation with David. I'm just showing you that Yahweh, God, is walking with David, leading him out of Jerusalem for a time. Only for a time. He'll be back soon. God is providing for David. He's protecting David, and he's also answering David's prayers immediately in this case. But don't forget, David is still living with the consequences of his past sins. Even though God is providing, protecting, and all the rest, David is still leaving Jerusalem, isn't he? He's a forgiven son. Psalm 51, Psalm 32, Psalm 38, David prays for forgiveness for these sins with Bathsheba, especially Psalm 51, and God grants forgiveness. But there are still consequences for the sins. And David is leaving Jerusalem as a deposed king while God is protecting him. You can't separate those two parts of this situation. consequences for his past sins continue even while he's walking intimately with his God. And God is answering his prayers instantly. Ahithophel's advice continues in verse 2. In verse 1, he says, let me choose 12,000 men. I'll lead them into battle. Verse 2, he says, I will come upon him while he is weary and exhausted, and I'll terrify him. David. He's weary, he's exhausted, and if 12,000 trained men go after him, it will terrify him, but we have to leave now. And he says, so that all the people who are with him will flee. There won't be a fight. If we terrify the great slayer of Goliath, if we can terrify David, the men in his charge will flee, and they'll all come back to Jerusalem. He says, then I, Ahithophel himself, David's counselor, David's ex-counselor, he said, I will strike down the king alone. So he wants to take 12,000 men and murder God's anointed king, David. Expecting that David's men will not have to be killed. They will turn coat themselves out of fear, and they will pledge their loyalty to you, Absalom. The question is this right advice? And the answer is, yes, it is. Everything he said is a true statement. Remember, he says David is weary and exhausted, and we should attack him now. Just look what it said a couple of chapters ago as David is leaving. In 2 Samuel 15, verse 30, it says David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives. So he's gone out of Jerusalem from the city of David down into the Kidron Valley. He's going up the Mount of Olives. And as he went, his head was covered and he walked barefoot. He was not ready for battle. He was humiliated and humbled, weary and exhausted. In all kinds of ways, mentally exhausted, spiritually exhausted, physically exhausted. He was in no way ready for battle. He was leaving in humiliation. It says that all the people who were with him each covered his head and went up weeping as they went. They're not ready for war. You let me go out with 12,000 men and pursue him now, and I've got him. I'll kill him. Only him. And you can have all his men. David left barefooted. He left with torn clothing. He left with head covering, dust on his head. He's not looking for a fight with his son. If he wanted to fight, he would have fought from Jerusalem, a fortified city, but he didn't. He chose to leave Jerusalem so that not even a stone of her walls would be damaged. He protected God's city, Jerusalem, knowing that he had brought all this on himself. So he considers exile from Jerusalem simply a further consequences of his past sinful life with Bathsheba and her husband Uriah. And so he chose not to fight. Instead, he fled in disgrace, and he accepted God's enforced humility. We don't talk much about that term, enforced humility. Let me just say this. You can either humble yourself before the mighty hand of God, or He will humble you under His mighty hand. He resists the proud. He gives grace to the humble. Which do you want to be, the proud or the humble? He resists the proud. You want to fight? You got it with Him. Or He gives grace to the humble. If you won't live in humility, God will enforce humility on you. And in this situation where you have David, who at least for a moment thought he was above the law, even God's Mosaic law, coveted his neighbor's wife, committed adultery with his neighbor's wife, committed murder with this wife's husband. Not acts of humility, acts of great arrogance and brashness. And what do we have here? We have enforced humility. I want you to lead my people with humility, David. You're showing me that you won't right now. Let's see about that. And David leaves Jerusalem being enforced upon him, with humility being enforced upon him by God. It reminds me of the verse in the New Testament that we read, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 and 7, which says, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he might exalt you in the proper time." You humble yourself. He has just talked about how he resists the proud. So Peter offers an alternative. Humble yourselves before this mighty hand of God. Because he'll humble you if you won't. But why don't you humble yourself before him, recognizing his authority in your life, so that when he's ready to exalt you, he's able to exalt you whenever that proper time in his plan is. How do we do this? At least part of the way, casting all your anxieties, your cares on him, because he cares for you. You're relevant to God. You're important to God. The scripture says, then humble yourself before this God, that he might be able to use you and even exalt you if that's what he wants to do. And David's doing the opposite here. And Ahithophel knows it. He's under the disciplinary hand of Yahweh. Ahithophel knows it. David knows it. He's downtrodden. He's weary. He's exhausted. He's in no situation, mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. He's in no situation to have a fight, to pick a fight, to defend himself in a fight, or else he would have. But he doesn't. And Ahithophel knows all this. He knows David's exhausted. He knows he's downtrodden. He knows he's not in any condition to fight a battle. So he says, let me take 12,000. I'll kill the king alone. I will hand you the throne, Absalom. Isn't this what you want? I'll take your enemy, your father, from your throne. I'll give you all of his men, and I'll present you on the throne before Israel. I can solidify your position as king. Isn't this what you want? And the answer to all of that is yes, 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 yes. Verse 3, I'll bring back all the people to you. The return of everyone depends on the man you seek. If I can defeat David, I can give you what you want. And I'm giving you proper advice. Then all the people, those who are following you and those who have left with David, all the people will be at peace with each other. Let me cut off the head of this snake. Let me go after David. Verse 4 says, so the plan pleased Absalom and the elders of Israel. And if the story stopped there, we'd have a very different Old Testament from here forward. But the story doesn't stop. Again, let me say it, this is great advice from Ahithophel. This is the way to defeat David. Great advice. But don't forget David's prayer. What did David pray when he found out Ahithophel was on Absalom's side? Lord, confound his advice. Make his advice foolishness. And then we see this man Hushai come into the picture. God's answer to David's prayer. He came in 2 Samuel 15 verse 32. David has just prayed this prayer. Make Ahithophel's advice foolishness. We just read what Ahithophel's advice is. 12,000 men, strategic attack, me at the front. David dies alone. You get all his men back. Everything is at peace. You're the king of Israel, Absalom. I can hand it to you on a silver platter. Let me go. And Absalom says, great. Verse 4, it pleased Absalom and everybody who heard it. As if the word of God had spoken, Ahithophel's advice came through. But you can't forget this other guy, Hushai, the answer to David's prayer. It happened as David was coming to the summit. Here's the great coincidence that's no coincidence at all, but the plan of God. It happened as David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, that behold, Hushai the Archite met him with his coat torn and dust on his head. He's one of David's. He's mourning the loss of David's kingdom. He's mourning the fact that this evil is in David's house. He's mourning the fact that David's own son would rise up against him. He is a Jewish man in mourning. In the next verse, David said to him, if you pass over with me, if you continue on this journey with me outside of Jerusalem, you will be a burden to me. That's not what I need. But this is what I need from you, friend, loyal friend. If you return to the city, Jerusalem, and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so I will now be your servant. If you can say this to my son and get him to believe it, and I know you can, then you can thwart, hard word, thwart the counsel of Ahithophel for me. I've prayed to God for this. You immediately show up in front of me. You're the answer to my prayers. You're the one that can make Ahithophel's counsel foolishness. And so in verse 5, here he is. Absalom says, and why God put this in Absalom's mind, you'll have to ask God one day. He has just heard Ahithophel's plan. He says, the plan is pleasing to me. It's pleasing to all the elders. Why Absalom at this moment sought a second opinion is between him and God. But he said, the king, now call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say. As if to say it can't hurt to get a second opinion. They're both known as wise counselors and advisor. And this, friends, is the answer to David's prayer. Immediate prayer answered with Hushai coming on the scene. Immediately as he goes back and Ahithophel gives his advice, God is answering David's prayer. As David is an exiled king, forgiven sinner, walking through the consequences of his sin in intimacy with God. You get all that? When Hushai had come to Absalom in verse 6, Absalom said to him, Ahithophel has spoken thus. Shall we carry out his plan? If not, then you speak. So he tells him exactly what Ahithophel has just told him. 12,000 men. I killed David alone. The men come back to you. All Israel is at peace. What do you say? And here we actually see God's answer to David's prayer in action. It moves now through human history. Hushai said to Absalom, this time, as opposed to all the other times when Ahithophel's advice was like the very voice and word of God, this time, unfortunately, King, the advice of Ahithophel has given is not good. Gutsy statement. Because it had pleased the king, and it had pleased all the elders of Israel. And Hushai, with his neck in the noose, says, I don't like the plan. Gutsy statement. And then Hushai, in verse 8 and 9, builds up his friend King David and makes him terrifying. You don't want to go against your father. Son, you don't know him the way I know him. You think you can beat your dad with 12,000 men? You're crazy. The slayer of Goliath is who we're talking about. And he flips the idea of Ahithophel saying he's weary, he's exhausted, he's humiliated, he's disgraced. Now's the time to strike. And this man, Hushai, David's friend, totally turns this on its head. He says, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men and they are fierce. You think 12,000 men can defeat David? 1,000 men would run from this one man. like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. That's the fierceness of David and his mighty men. Your father is an expert in warfare. What do you know about war, Absalom? Nothing. Your father is an expert in warfare and will not spend the night with the people. You think you're going to go attack the people and find David. David knows too much about warfare. He won't be there. Verse 9 says, behold, he has now hidden himself in one of the caves or in another place. You'll never find David. It's one of those events where if he doesn't want to be found, you won't find him. He's that good at what he does. And this Ahithophel's naive plan that he, the counselor of Israel, is going to go lead this 12,000 man army and find David and kill him single-handedly. This is all nonsense. It wasn't, but he sure makes it out to be. Your dad is not a man to be reckoned with, Absalom. He's hidden himself in a cave. It will be when he falls on them at the first attack, because you're going to send your men in, your 12,000, and David's going to annihilate that crew from his hiding places, that whoever hears of this first attack, that Absalom sent in 12,000 men and David defeated them, whoever hears of this will say there has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. Because you can't beat David. Ahithophel thinks you can. Ahithophel thinks he can. No chance that you can defeat King David. What a picture, huh? What a different picture from weary and pathetic and all disgraced and all the other things, that weary and exhausted. Hushai says, weary and exhausted, don't forget all that. This is a trained man of war. He will destroy you. He presents him as a skilled warrior ready to pounce on any force that Absalom would send his way. 12,000 men won't fix the situation. But it's interesting to me because the obvious truth is that if David wanted to fight, he would have stayed in the fortified city of Jerusalem and fought from there. Hushai has just painted a picture that's not real. There is no reality in what Hushai just painted to Absalom. But I'm thinking what we're seeing here is Absalom is clearly missing reality. He's so thirsty for power, he's so arrogant and proud that he's missing the reality of, wait a minute. I've heard reports that my father did leave weary and exhausted with torn clothing and dust on his hair and barefooted. You're presenting him as this warrior in his chain ready for a fight. But I know that's not true. I have eyewitness reports of how David left. But here you have a situation in the Scripture where reality is before Absalom and his own sin has blinded him to reality. His lustful thirst for power has him blinded to reality and the truth. The truth is, David is weary and exhausted and humiliated. Hushai has painted this picture that he is a fierce warrior ready for battle. It's not true at all. Verse 10, even the one who is valiant, whose heart is like the heart of a lion. Because Jewish men know how to fight. They're courageous warriors. Even that man will completely lose heart when David defeats your 12,000 man army. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Ahithophel's advice has been made foolishness by Hushai. Hushai uses the character and experience and past of David to elevate David into this almost superhuman, we can't beat King David warrior image. Ahithophel shows him as a defeated, humiliated, disgraced, sinful king. One is true, very true, and the other is not true at all. He's painted a picture. But Absalom is convinced by Hushai now that David will defeat him if he listens to Ahithophel's advice and only sends 12,000 men. And that would end Absalom's dream of being king. So he continues, Hushai, in verse 11, you said, if I don't like the plan, tell you what I think. I say, I counsel that all Israel be surely gathered to you. Not to Ahithophel, and not only 12,000 men, but all the army of Israel. Muster all the troops if you're going to fight King David. He says, from Dan even to Beersheba, which is, Dan is the northernmost point of Israel. Beersheba is down in the south. So all of Israel, Dan to Beersheba is simply, I forget the literary phrase, but it means the whole thing. All of Israel, Dan to Beersheba, as the sand that is by the sea in abundance, and that, here's the kicker, and that you personally go into battle. So what does Hushai want? He wants Absalom killed on the battlefield. How does he get him there? He builds up his pride. No one can lead the armies of Israel but you. Not Ahithophel and his 12,000. If you want to defeat the great valiant warrior King David, I'm telling you, Absalom, you can do it. But Ahithophel cannot. Oh, men, you can lead them around like mules, can't you? You appeal to their pride, their arrogance, and you pretty much got them beat. It's exactly what just happened. You personally go into battle, and you will defeat the great King David. I can just see his chest puffing out. You're right. I can do it. Verse 12, so we shall come to him in one of the places where he can be found, which is interesting because he just said if David doesn't want to be found, he won't be found. I mean, listen to the brain of an arrogant man being fed now. His lusts, his hungers, his desires are being fed now, and he's just eating with 2 spoons. So even the reality of what's just been counseled him has now been switched a little bit. It doesn't matter. He's in lust mode. Power, hungry Absalom. So we shall come to him, the armies of Israel, in one of the places where he can be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. Easy. There's no problem for the dew to fall on the ground. There's no effort involved. It'll be simple and easy. And of him and of all the men who are with him, not even one will be left. And you can see Absalom just getting more and more into it, enjoying it more and more. I'll kill every one of them. Just feeding a man's ego. Ahithophel said, we'll kill only David. Absalom, or here Hushai says, kill them all. And boy, does Absalom like the sound of all of this. Listen in verse 13, more strong language from Hushai. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city and will drag it into the valley until not even a small stone is found there. And an arrogant man like Absalom is just feeding on these words. So Absalom has been given 2 options now. Number 1, a 12,000 man army led by Ahithophel. 1 man dies. David. Number 2, all the army of Israel led by Absalom himself, the great king. Go into battle against David and kill all of David's men, David included. And this power-hungry, thirsty, crazed, sinful man, Absalom, picks door number 2. And now we see in the story that Hushai is going to leave Absalom's presence. He's done his work. He's thwarted the advice of Ahithophel. Ahithophel wants to kill 1 man. Absalom, once he starts hearing the story, Hushai totally gets all worked up into a lather. He picks Hushai's story and he goes against Ahithophel's advice. And now we see the second part of David's plan come to fruition. Now Hushai needs to get all this information to King David, doesn't he? He needs to let him know what just happened. He needs to let him know what Absalom is thinking, what Ahithophel said, what he said in place. And so he enters into phase 2 of the plan. Remember what it was? Go to the high priests, tell them what's going on. They will tell their sons, and their sons will be messengers to me. And so in verse 15, we see part 2 of the plan. Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar, these are the 2 high priests of Israel. He says, this is what Ahithophel counseled Absalom and the elders of Israel, and this is what I have counseled. So he tells the high priest, this is the message. Give it to your sons so they can carry it to David. Verse 16, now therefore send quickly and tell David. And say to him, do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness. Don't stop where you are. Continue pushing east. Do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over. Cross over what? The Jordan River. Go into the Transjordan. Go east of the Jordan River. By all means, you see that in the next couple of verses, the Jordan River. He says, by all means cross over, or else the king and all the people who are with him will be destroyed. You can't wait, King David. I've given him instructions to gather the army and to kill all of you. You need to keep moving. And now we have the high priest's sons enter into the story, who are going to carry the message to King David. Part 3. Part 1, make the advice foolishness. Part 2, get the information to the high priest. Part 3, let them get the information to their sons who will run it to David. Now these are the boys, the sons of the high priest. Now Jonathan, and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. And a maidservant would go and tell them. And they would go and tell King David, for they could not be seen entering the city. So the information goes from the high priests who are in Jerusalem. They actually use a female, a slave, a maidservant, and this female takes the information to the 2 boys because they can't be seen coming and going from the city. Or else they'd know something was up. But verse 18 says, they were seen. Their secrecy has been blown. Their cover has been blown. And now they are in danger. And if they are in danger, that means David's in danger of never getting this message. How's God going to deal with this? So Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. They send a maidservant out. They get the information. They're trying to get it to David. But in verse 18 it says, but a lad, a young boy, did see them, and he told Absalom. So a boy sees them leaving, and he goes and tells Absalom. It says, so the 2 of them quickly departed and came to the house of a man in Bahurim. They're running for cover, and they've gone to a man's house. The man had a well, a water well, a dug-out water well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. Now, we don't see that the man is helping anywhere here. We simply see that there's a man who has property and has a well. What we do see in action is a woman. Very interesting, these unsung heroes of the faith. Here's this woman taking her life in her own hands. At verse 19 it says, and the woman, I'm assuming this is the wife of the household, she took a covering and she spread it over the well's mouth. So who's hiding them? She is. She took a covering and she spread it over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it so that nothing was known. She's responsible for keeping these men safe. Kind of reminds you of another story when another 2 men had gone in years before into the city of Jericho. They were in danger of their lives, and they were hidden by whom? Rahab the harlot, another woman, taking her life into her own hands to protect God's message and God's messengers. Fascinating. So the high priest's sons realize they'd been found out. They can't continue on their journey to David safely. So they divert course. They go to Bahurim. They go down into this well. And thank God there's a courageous woman there who covers the well. The message is in danger. It may not reach David if they can't get out of this well and continue. In verse 20 it says, then Absalom's servants came. They're there, Bahurim, at this man's house, looking around his property. They know in what direction these men have gone because the lad told them. And they come and they ask, it says Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and said, where are Ahimaaz and Yonatan? Where have you hidden them? And the woman said to them, and you tell me if this is a perfect truth or if it's an untruth. We'll have to ask God about this when we get there. They have crossed the brook of water. True or false? No, they haven't. They're in the well, and I've hidden them from you. They have crossed the brook of water, and when these men from Absalom searched, they could not find them, and so they returned to Jerusalem. And what this is a lie. I mean, things are either black or white, they're true or false, death or life. This is an untruth. There's no question about it. An untruth. Takes me back to another story in the early pages of Genesis where the king of Egypt, the one called Pharaoh, told all the Hebrew midwives, when the Jewish women get pregnant because they were increasing in number too much, they were too strong, Israel. When the Jewish women get pregnant, if they birth a girl, let her live. If they birth a son, kill him. Remember that? But the men, the sons in Israel are still being born and they're still growing in number. So Pharaoh calls in the midwives and says, I thought I told you to kill them. And what did the midwives say? Anybody know that part of the story? What did the midwives tell Pharaoh? They're too vigorous. They're too strong. When I get to the Jewish women to help them deliver their children, they've already done it. How am I going to steal a son out of a Jewish woman's hand to go kill him? I can't do it. Otherwise, maybe I take the baby, I smother it before the mother knows. I say it's a stillbirth and it's okay, but I can't take a living, breathing child. They are too vigorous. Is that true or false? Now that's what you call a lie. And where you see that line where it's proper to protect human life, which is what we're dealing with here, the protection of human life. It's what the Hebrew midwives were dealing with. It's what this woman is dealing with. She is protecting human life. And when human life needs to be protected and only a lie can divert, it seems as if God says, okay. Now we could take that up with God when we're there. But we see this picture several times in the Scripture. When human life is on the line, he gives a little leeway. Interesting, isn't it? So she says they've crossed the brook of water. No, they haven't. They're in your water well. They can't find the men, so they go back to Jerusalem. And in verse 21, it says, it came about after they had departed. So after Absalom's men have come and searched and can't find these two sons of the high priest, they go back to Jerusalem. And once, once they leave, Ahimaaz and Yonatan come up out of the well and went and told King David. Was just a brief pause in their trip. But I wonder how downtrodden they were. I wonder if they thought this will never work. I wonder if they thought they had been thwarted, beaten, defeated, that they couldn't get news to David. I wonder what they thought when they were in the well. We're not told, but I'd love to know of the prayer life of what was going on in the souls of these two men, knowing that the lives of the anointed king of Israel, David, was on the line, that he had to be told, you have to continue east, you have to cross the river, knowing that David's life was at stake. I can only hope that they were praying diligently that the Lord would see them through out of this well and to King David. And that's exactly where they got. They got out of the well, they went and told King David, and they said to David, arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus, excuse me, Ahithophel has counseled against you. So, the situation here seems to be that Ahithophel may come out tonight with his 12,000 men. The Absalom's choice has not been made. All we know is what Ahithophel counseled and what Hushai counseled. The ball is in Absalom's court to decide. But if he decides door number one and goes with Ahithophel's 12,000 men, they'll be on you by this evening. You've got to go. Verse 22 says, then David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed the Jordan, and by dawn not even one remained who had not crossed the Jordan River. So they took the people's advice, or David believed the words of these two men. The plan was exactly how he had drawn it up. Hushai got the information, got it to the high priest, who got it to their sons, and now David has the information to do something with it. He chooses to leave, to go further east, and he crosses the Jordan River into safety. And given the time of day, we're stopping our story right there. We'll pick up the last 5 verses next week. What happens to Ahithophel? I'll just read it to you so you know where we're going to start. It says, now when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, as the days went on, he saddled his donkey and arose and went to his home, to his city, and set his house in order, and strangled himself. That means he hung himself. Thus he died and was buried in the grave of his father. A once revered counselor of Israel, who has decided to turn coat, to not be loyal to his king David, but to be loyal to David's conspirator son Absalom, ends up hanging from his own rope at his own house. Reminds me of the story of Judas Iscariot, who went against David's child, Jesus Christ, and also ended up dying from a self-inflicted wound. Both men suicides. We'll close in prayer. We'll pick up with that story next time, finish verse 17, and push on to verse 18, where we will see Absalom killed. Very interesting. How many times have we talked about retributive justice, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that God's punishment always fits the crime? And here we have Absalom, who's going to gather the whole tribes of Israel together, all the army, so that he can go out and kill David, God's anointed. And what does God do? You want to kill my son? I'll kill you. It's retributive justice. It's perfect justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. You want to take David's life? You'll surrender yours at my hand. And that's exactly what we'll see in another twist in the story. Just the way Ahithophel hangs himself and dies while hanging, we'll see that Absalom also gets hung, but this time by God himself, as his hair gets stuck in a tree, and Joab comes to kill him with the sword, hanging from a tree. Fascinating stories. You can't, only God can write these things. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father,